Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW, or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
The Herald, Wednesday the 2nd of November 2022. News. Diageo sets sights on cutting skills shortages. This article is by Christy Dorsey. Drinks group Diageo has signed a 3-year partnership to help address chronic skills shortages across the UK hospitality industry. The Springboard and Prince's Trust charities have agreed to run Diageo's Learning for Life programme for the next 3 years in a bid to support more than 3,000 young people into work. Springboard will be the lead partner with the Prince's Trust, supporting delivery of early stage training. Hospitality organisations up and down the country will be as delighted as we are to hear that our incredible partnership with Diageo is continuing for a further 3 years, Springboard Chief Executive Chris Gam said. Learning for Life plays such an important role in turning out skilled and qualified professionals into the industry, future-proofing the talent pipeline for hospitality. Since launching in the UK in 2012, 5,374 people have participated in the Learning for Life programme on more than 360 courses. The renewed partnership will extend the bartending and hospitality course to include 3 new delivery models. According to industry group UK Hospitality, there are currently 400,000 vacancies across the sector. Together with an average of 100,000 staff absences, the industry is missing more than 20% of its workforce on a day-to-day basis. We know the hospitality industry continues to face unprecedented challenges, and many communities are struggling when it comes to recruitment, said Kate Moore, Society Manager at Diageo. Ben Marsden, Director of Partnerships at the Prince's Trust, added, "We are delighted to be partnering with Springboard for the Diageo Learning for Life programme and believe that during this challenging time for the hospitality sector, we can bring together our collective strengths to support young people into meaningful work in the hospitality sector and ultimately to build a better future for themselves." This article is by Christy Dorsey.
From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 3rd of November 2022, from the sports section. Pep Guardiola feels Man City record-breaker Rico Lewis has something special. Pep Guardiola hailed Rico Lewis as something special after the teenager became Manchester City's youngest Champions League goalscorer on Wednesday. The right-back, aged 17 years and 346 days, marked his first senior start by netting City's equaliser as he came from behind to beat Sevilla 3-1 in their final Champions League group game. It was a sweet moment for the Manchester-born youngster, who took full advantage of an opportunity to play in the continuing absence of injured England international Kyle Walker. "We don't give presents because he's a Man City fan or from the academy," said City manager Guardiola. "You have to earn it. But we've seen him since day one of pre-season. This guy has something special. Defensively he's aggressive, and with the ball he is so good. Of course he's a lot to improve on, but the academy here is working amazingly." Lewis's strike early in the second half cancelled out a first half header from Rafa Mir, and City went on to win comfortably with further goals from Julian Alvarez and Riyad Mahrez. Lewis was substituted 5 minutes from time and, as he was on the far side of the field at the time, earned a huge reception as he walked around the field back to the bench. He made a standing ovation all the way around, said Guardiola. He played really good. He is 17 years old, but he is so clever, so intelligent. You say something, he understands everything. I'm happy for him. It was also a good night for Alvarez, who scored one and provided the passes for the other 2 goals. Guardiola said, "There is not one player in the locker room who is not happy for him. He is a special guy. He was patient and found the space and got the rewards he deserved." There had been little riding on the game, with City already through to the last 16 as Group G winners. Guardiola said, "Of course we had qualified, but we finished well. For the money and the prestige, it is good for the club. It was a good night for us, especially the second half." Sevilla boss George Sampaoli felt his side faded after a strong start. The former Argentina manager, who was appointed last month and is bidding to turn around a poor start to the season, said, "We were quite comfortable in controlling the game. We put in a great effort mentally and physically, but then we shot ourselves in the foot with a couple of unforced errors, which spoiled a lot of the good work we did." And that report was unattributed. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 3rd of November 2022, Sport. Rangers achieve another unwanted Champions League record. By Mark Walker. Rangers have achieved another unwanted record from their dismal Champions League group stage. Their shot-shy strikers had the least attempts on goal out of all 32 teams and the least shots on target. Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's side became embarrassing history makers this week after officially being the worst ever team in the Champions League since it was revamped in 1992, following their 6 defeats and a goal difference of -20. And, after the final games in the groups were played last night, it was revealed that Rangers only managed 44 attempts at goal in their 6 games. And of those, they only managed 12 on target, a pitiful 2 per game. They were 3 behind second worst team Shakhtar Donetsk, who may only have managed 15 shots on target, but they scored 8 goals and finished ahead of Celtic. Celtic were 13th in the list of the 32 teams with shots on target, with 29, and were 12th in the standings with 82 attempts, almost double that of Rangers. Other figures showed the Old Firm's possession stats were very close, with Celtic 28th with 44.2% and Rangers were 29th with 40.7%. However, Celtic were actually in 8th place with a passing accuracy of 87.5%, ahead of teams like Napoli, Liverpool and Juventus. But Rangers' passing accuracy was 4th bottom in the list at 79.5%. And that report was by Mark Walker. From the Herald Scotland, Thursday the 3rd of November 2022, for the sports section, World Cup worry for Ben Chilwell as he suffers hamstring injury and Chelsea win. And this article is unattributed. England defender Ben Chilwell's World Cup hopes could be in danger after he suffered a hamstring injury in the closing stages of Chelsea's 2-1 win over Dynamo Zagreb in the Champions League. Blues boss Graham Potter admitted to concern over the left-back after he pulled up just minutes before the final whistle at Stamford Bridge. Chelsea had come from behind thanks to goals from Raheem Sterling and debutant Denis Zakaria after Bruno Petkovic had put the Croatian side ahead, but Chilwell's injury marred the evening. Potter, who told BBC Sport it was a hamstring problem, added in his post-match press conference, "It's not great. Obviously when he pulls up like that there's a concern, so we need to scan, but it doesn't look positive at the moment. It's a blow for us on an otherwise positive evening, I think. It's a blow to see him pull up like that. It's not a great sight. So fingers crossed when we get the scan it isn't bad. It cannot be severe, but we'll have to have fingers crossed at the moment. But clearly we're disappointed." Chilwell, who was later pictured leaving the ground on crutches, did not start during his side's 4-1 thrashing at Brighton at the weekend, and the club was managing his workload after he battled back from a serious anterior cruciate ligament injury. Potter believes the setback could harm the defender's hope of being part of Gareth Southgate's World Cup squad, with England playing their first game of the tournament in Qatar against Iran on November the 21st. "I think you'd have to say so, that this is a concern for the World Cup," Potter said. "Obviously, I don't want to say any more than that, but when a player pulls up like he did, and he felt it, so it's never positive. He didn't play at the weekend, There was a thought he could play tonight and have enough time to recover for the weekend. So we've tried to manage him. He's never played 3 games in a week. He's had to have the build up. It's been good for him. That's what makes it so very frustrating. It's a blow for us and a blow for him, and sadly, he won't be the only one who's affected like that in this period, because October was incredibly challenging, the games that we had to play, but it is what it is. Zagreb manager Ante Kacic was proud of his players despite their exit from Europe after they finished bottom of the group, having gone into the game needing a win and a defeat for Salzburg to reach the Europa League playoffs. I think it's realistic the end result in 4th place in our group. The reputation of all the other teams is very high. Chelsea and Milan always play in these competitions, he said. I think Dynamo had a very brave performances all through this competition. Our players are proud, and they should be proud of how they played through this competition. And that article was unattributed.
The Herald Scotland, Thursday, 3rd of November 2022. Voices. Holyrood's popular, Westminster's not, so change the UK voting system. By Rebecca McQuillan, Senior Features Writer. The Scottish Government is an OK government. Not bad, not brilliant, but OK. It has cut climate emissions, boosted renewables, increased welfare payments to the worst off, rolled out free childcare and free school meals for P1 to P5s, brought in more NHS staff, and introduced minimum unit pricing for alcohol. At the same time, on the SNP's watch, children from poor backgrounds have remained well behind their wealthy peers in exam attainment. Scottish pupils have fallen in the world rankings in maths and science. The number of staffed NHS beds has reduced significantly. We are still chronically short of doctors and nurses. The Scottish Government even cut student nurse places when Nicola Sturgeon was Health Secretary. And the fiasco surrounding the procurement of 2 ferries drags embarrassingly onwards. They are currently 5 years late and 2.5 times over budget. Like I say, not bad, but not brilliant. But even those who regard Scottish ministers as numpties seem to take the forgiving view that at least they're our numpties. The latest annual survey of what Scottish people think of their 2 governments has found that, despite well-documented problems in hospitals, schools and other services, 2/3 of people trust Scottish ministers to work in Scotland's best interests. Just 22% of those questioned in the Scottish Social Attitude Survey say the same of the UK government. 63% think Holyrood gives ordinary people more of a say in how Scotland is run, and a similar number think Holyrood gives Scotland a stronger voice. 40% meanwhile think the UK government is not at all good at listening, and 57% don't trust the UK government to make fair decisions very much, or at all. These are stark findings, so what conclusions should we draw? Perhaps above all, if Westminster wants to rebuild trust, then it must learn from Holyrood. It could start with a better voting system. It might be tempting to conclude from these survey results that Scottish voters are full of enthusiasm for the NSP and even independence, but is that true? Well, disdain for the Tories under Boris Johnson shows through strongly. The survey was conducted from October 2021 to March 2022. We can detect resentment of Brexit and the residual impression established during the pandemic that Nicola Sturgeon is more competent than her UK counterpart. The SNP is also highly adept and completely shameless about deflecting blame onto Westminster for the shortcomings of Scotland's public services, which is only partly justified. But none of this means that Scots are essentially fed up with being part of the UK. Not even Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson, in welcoming the survey, claimed that. Actually, what this survey shows most clearly is that devolution is working. The whole point of devolution, supported by 3/4 of the Scottish public and all parties except the Tories, was to create a parliament that was closer to the people it served, focused entirely on Scotland, and that could be trusted to champion Scotland within the UK. The Social Attitude Survey shows again and again that Holyrood has succeeded on all counts. But this survey also shows that people do not feel their priorities are reflected by Westminster in the same way as they are at Holyrood. It shows they want a stake in both their governments, or at least a sense that the London Cabinet reflects their priorities after years of Tory governments they didn't vote for. Some argue that that is a vain hope, not worth holding out for, and that the UK should just break up. But others would argue a Labour government, and better still, a new proportional UK-wide voting system at Westminster, would change the terms of the whole debate. Switch on First Minister's questions on a Thursday, and it's unlikely the first word to spring to mind would be consensus. Scrap, perhaps, or stushy, or trench warfare, but not like-mindedness. The truth is, though, that if the independence question is removed from the equation, there is a high degree of consensus across the benches in Holyrood. 4 out of the 5 parties represented can be described as progressive, and left or centre-left, and the spread of MSPs reflects public opinion in Scotland pretty accurately. This, in turn, is down to Holyrood, using a voting system that is more proportional than the one used in Westminster elections. It helps explain why Holyrood comes out with such high approval ratings versus Westminster, in spite of the Scottish Government having clocked up its share of disappointments and blunders over the last 15 years. People feel that at least its heart is in the right place. Can the same be said of Westminster? It cannot. The Tories, elected on 43% of the vote, have a huge majority in Parliament and have pursued increasingly niche policies that do not reflect the priorities of the majority. Liz Truss's term of office epitomised how unaccountable it had become, with plans to lower taxes on the rich and roll back laws intended to protect ecosystems. In Scotland, where 64% of voters think tax and spending on education, health and social benefits should increase, such a right-wing UK government feels like a democratic abomination. Importantly, though, that disillusionment is matched elsewhere in the UK. Significantly, more people at the last election voted for parties of the left and centre-left than for the Tories. They just didn't see their choice reflected in Parliament because of the first-past-the-post. English voters are a bit less progressive and a bit more conservative than Scottish voters, but the differences are less significant than many believe. And we know that British voters are now almost as mutinous about the Westminster government as Scottish voters are. YouGov surveys have shown for many months that people in the Midlands, north of England, London, and even the south of England disapprove of the Tory government by huge margins. That disillusionment helps explain why the British Social Attitudes Survey, for the first time, has recorded majority support across the UK for changing the voting system to proportional representation. It's just fairer. Scotland should rightly have 10 or 11 Labour MPs. Instead, it has 1. PR needs to happen and looks increasingly as if it will. Then we will see how the people of Scotland feel about their 2 parliaments.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 2nd of November 2022, from the opinion section, A Time to Celebrate Glasgow's Engineers, by Stuart Patrick. There is a decent-sized iron plaque on the Kavanagh Bridge across the Singapore River that simply reads P&W McClellan Engineers 1868 Glasgow. It is Singapore's only suspension bridge and one of the oldest of the city's river crossings, and I came across the sign on a summer visit. Opened in 1870, the structure first linked the city's civic district to its commercial centre, and, today, provides a pedestrian connection from the Asian Civilisations Museum in the north to the towering office blocks of Fullerton Square in the south. It was built and tested by P&W McClellan in Glasgow and shipped across to Singapore in sections in 1869. This is just one example of the global legacy of Glasgow's engineering industry, and I bring it to your attention simply because today is National Engineering Day. Having a National Day for Engineering is a brainchild of the Royal Academy of Engineering and is designed to raise public awareness of the impact engineers have on the way we live today, and to help encourage young people from all geographies, genders and cultural backgrounds to consider engineering as a career. Glasgow has a special reason to pay attention, since the Royal Academy's current president is their own Professor Sir Jim MacDonald, Principal of the University of Strathclyde. Mentioning Glasgow's historical role in the evolution of engineering risks nostalgic depression at the loss of the shipyards and the locomotive engineering plants that dominated the city in the heyday of its heavy industrial past. It is certainly true that manufacturing no longer plays anything like the role it once did, and that its unnecessarily swift contraction in the early 1980s left Glasgow with an economic development mountain to climb. But it would be plain wrong to think that Glasgow is no longer an engineering city. There are 52,000 jobs in manufacturing in the Glasgow city region, another 37,000 in transportation, and a further 8,000 in power supplies. Engineering is fundamental to each of these industries. It's not hard to find examples of impressive engineering projects. On the banks of the Clyde in Govan sits HMS Glasgow, the first of the Royal Navy's new Type 26 frigates, and one of the most complex technical challenges in today's engineering world. There is also the 3 miles of Scottish Water's Shield Hall Tunnel, opened in 2018. 5 times longer than the Clyde Tunnel, it improves water quality in the River Clyde while reducing the risk of flooding. Scottish Power's Whiteleaf Wind Farm is another excellent example, the biggest in the UK and the top 5 in Europe, with new projects underway to develop a green hydrogen production facility and a battery energy storage system. It's also very easy to find some practical engineering inspiration for younger family members in Glasgow. Pay a visit to the Glasgow Science Centre, crowned by the public as this year's favourite business at the Glasgow Business Awards. There are plenty of interactive exhibits like Powering the Future or Quantum Technologies, which explain the engineering involved and the fact that you can build an engineering career here in the city right now. If we were to achieve our climate goals for 2030, we have to transform our public transport and energy systems, and encouraging the next generation of engineers is vital. We have emerging industries in advanced manufacturing, quantum and photonics, space communications, telecommunications and renewable technologies that will need a steady stream of new talent to help them grow. Our professional engineers today support projects all over across the world, just as they did back in 1868, and the largest job growth in any sector in the city between 2016 and 2019 was architectural and engineering services, with over 4,000 new jobs created. Over the next 10 years, our 3 innovation districts in Glasgow will become the nerve centres of our niche engineering economy, and National Engineering Day reminds us how attractive an engineering career in Glasgow can be. By Stuart Patrick, who is Chief Executive of Glasgow Chamber of Commerce. From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 2nd of November 2022, from the Voices section, Opinion, Memories of Jimmy Reid, the patron saint of the Yes movement, come flooding back, by Brian McGeechan. Once upon a time there were 2 pals, both committed to a cause, their souls seared by the vision splendid. When they spoke, you felt the air electrify. Jimmy Reid from the Clyde shipyards and Neil Kinnock from the mining valleys of South Wales. Platform speakers who elevated the weaving of dreams through words to a high art. Art, not artifice. This week I brought pals together again, in print. Neil Kinnock wrote a foreword to my manuscripts of conversations with Jimmy. Reading the pages in one night, he told me, "You've brought him back to me." Neil's words about his old pal are forensic, poetic and profound. Elated by this honour, I soon found a cloud in the silver lining. The last foreword Neil wrote was for the recently deceased Mikhail Gorbachev. Am I next for cashing my chips? Another cloud assails me. The unedifying circus show from the Palace of Westminster exposes politicos like Bojo and Ms. Truss as players of power games. To them, integrity appears as distant as the dissolution of the monasteries. They possess all the qualities of a poker without the occasional warmth. The result, public confidence in leaders is so low it's practically subterranean. Autodidacts like Jimmy and Neil wrung oratorical flourishes from their ideology and commitment to social justice. Their views diverged, of course, and Jimmy is now the patron saint of the Yes movement. To me, Jimmy offers the most persuasive argument for independence. During the 1992 election, I was a cub reporter for a now defunct city newspaper. In Glasgow Central Station, Screaming Lord Sutch was buying me my first pint, while Neil and Glenys disembarked a battery of cameras. They were met by the band, Jeannie Maxwell and the Jazzwegians. Unaccountably, Jeannie wore a black top hat and purple sash, like the chief mourner in a New Orleans funeral procession. Then something happened that would be impossible today. Neil and his wife Glenys began jiving on the platform, an act of joyous spontaneity that eschewed stage management. Veteran journalists were disarmed by this formidably intelligent duo who spoke of a new dawn for Scotland. Crowds surged to greet them, while Southern England got excited over nothing, or John Major, which is the same as nothing. Danny Coffey, SNP Provost of Kilmarnock and Loudon, possessed the same warmth and intelligence. He held deep concern for people using language to galvanise and inspire. It helped that he was a stalwart of the Kilmarnock Burns Club. His early death, in 2006, robbed Scotland of a public servant of great humanity. I once quoted philosopher William Sinclair to him: "It is better to be within 1 Scots mile of where you were heading than the exact spot of anywhere else." "Sinclair's from Kilmarnock?" asked Danny. Renfrewshire replied. "Ah well, no one's perfect," was Danny's riposte. In politics, as in life, cynicism is more durable than sentimentality. Oh, but to glimpse again that vision splendid, shared by politicians with poetry in their souls. By Brian McGeechan, who's an author and playwright.
Herald Scotland recorded on Thursday, 3rd of November 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Books. The Call of the Cormorant by Donald S. Murray, by Alistair Mabbott. The Call of the Cormorant, Donald S. Murray, Sarah Band, £9.99. On a cold night in the early 20th century, Carol Einarson's father Magnus reads Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth aloud to his young son Carl, his daughter Christiana, and 2 local men. The unsophisticated fishermen were astounded by Verne's descriptions of gigantic subterranean mushrooms, mastodons and plesiosaurs, believing it to be a genuine account of an expedition beneath the Earth's surface. Carl and his father share a smug grin. I remember smiling to myself, aware for the first time how gullible and innocent people could be, how easily they could be tricked and fooled. The grown-up Carl remembers. It was a lesson he took to heart, and one that wasn't without consequences. Donald S. Murray's fictionalised biography of Carol Einarson, 1897 to 1972, shines some light on an obscure, idiosyncratic artist who adopted the surname Dungannon and whose nom de plumes include the Count of St Kilda, despite his never having set foot in Scotland. Born in Iceland, he grew up in the Faroese capital of Tórshavn, raised in his autodidact father's endless stream of stories and fanciful notions. In particular, Magnus Einarsson was obsessed with the theory that St Kilda was once the outer edge of Atlantis, whose survivors migrated from the doomed continent to populate the lands of the North Atlantic. A talented artist and cruelly accurate mimic with a fertile imagination, Carl is not popular in Tórshavn, where he's considered, like his father, to be a little too pleased with himself and his intellect. Knowing he doesn't fit in, Carl wants to spread his wings and travel to places where he can find others on his wavelength. Murray contrasts Carl with his sister Christiana, who also feels the tug of the outside world, but just as Carl is being sent away to school in the more populous and cosmopolitan Copenhagen, decides that staying where she is and exploring her inner world is the better path for her, a choice she has many years to mull over as she settles into a long, passionless marriage. In Copenhagen and then in 1930s Berlin, Carl puts his Count of St Kilda persona to good use. Brackets. Other aliases include King Cormorant the 12th of Atlantis, Carolus Africanus Dungannon, and Professor Valentinus, close brackets, using it to rub shoulders with landed gentry and running a succession of scams alongside his day job designing film posters. When the Nazis come to power, he tries to keep his head down and go with the flow, hoping his Danish passport will protect him. But however much he tries to ignore the Nazis, they don't ignore him, and to his horror he's recruited to be the Faroese equivalent of Lord Haw-Haw, broadcasting propaganda to his old homeland. His father's theories about Aryans being the descendants of the people of Atlantis and all the homilies he's endured about the innate decency of island folk are twisted and weaponised for the Nazi cause. As fascinated as he is by both Carl and his bumptious father, a powerful presence whose charisma and intellectual energy continue to drive the narrative long after his death, Murray himself takes more after the grounded Christiana, mindful of how cutting oneself from one's roots can result in the loss of one's bearings. But as much as we can mock his delusions, his denial, and his pretensions, such as devising an Atlantean language and proceeding to recite poetry in it, to the bemusement of his listeners, this engagingly written portrait of a fascinatingly odd individual ensures that he never quite loses our sympathy. By Alistair Mabbitt. Herald Scotland recorded on Wednesday, 2nd of November 2022. Arts and Entertainments. That Blackadder ending and other great emotional moments in comedy by Gabriel Mackay, digital journalist. On this day in 1989, the final episode of Blackadder was aired on BBC One. Its final series had attracted some criticism in earlier instalments, with some contemporary reviewers feeling its First World War setting was inappropriate for a knockabout comedy famous for its puns and slapstick. Writers Richard Curtis and Ben Elton did go to great lengths to portray the grim reality of life in the trenches, albeit through a comic lens. Witness Baldrick's increasingly disgusting recipes, including rat au vin, or van rather, given it consisted of a rodent which had been run over by a military vehicle. The spectre of death is there throughout its 6-episode run, but it's played for laughs. Captain Blackadder notes that the military strategy consists of climbing out of our trenches and walking very slowly towards the enemy, while General Melchett, a brash and incompetent warmonger, declares that if nothing else works, a total pig-headed unwillingness to look facts in the face will see us through. This tone prevails until the final 3 minutes of the series, when a sudden volte-face upends everything the audience has come to expect of Blackadder and instantly places it among the most iconic endings in television history. Melchett's right-hand man, Captain Darling, is sent to the front line against his protests. He's met by Blackadder, who has spent the episode unsuccessfully pretending to be insane in the hopes of being invalided back to Blighty. Baldrick and Lieutenant George, a privately educated dimwit who has been eagerly anticipating the chance to go over the top and declares the troop will be sucking sausages in Berlin by tea time. Almost imperceptibly, Hugh Laurie's tone changes. "Sir," George says to Blackadder, "I'm scared, sir." "I'm scared too, sir," agrees Baldrick. We get one more Darling joke at the character's expense before he tells the others how he'd hoped to return home, play cricket and marry his childhood sweetheart, instantly humanising a previously unsympathetic character. There's a moment of hope as the guns stop and the characters speculate that peace has been achieved and there will be a happy ending after all. "Oh, thank God," says Darling. "We lived through it. The Great War, 1914 to 1917. This is a technique known as dramatic irony, and while there's a titter from the studio audience, it doesn't seem to be a line primarily written for laughs. We're offered one more hope of redemption as Baldrick, as he has throughout the series, comes up with a cunning plan, as the orders to advance are being called. It is, he assures Blackadder, as cunning as a fox who's just been appointed Professor of Cunning at Oxford University. The captain, though, knows it's too late, and after wishing everyone good luck, he leads his men over the top. We see flashes of light, we hear explosions and gunshots, then the screen simply fades to a field of poppies. No last-minute escape, no big joke to end on, and all the more effective because of what came before. That ending has gone down as one of the best in history, but it's far from the only example of comedy that can deliver an emotional gut punch. Witness the end of Series 2 of the UK version of The Office, as we see David Brent cast aside his banter and bluster to beg tearfully for his job. When Will Smith started in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he was known as a hip-hop star, but he soon showed the acting chops that would make him the box office king in the series' more emotional moments. One episode sees his character, also named Will, reunited with his estranged father. As he was warned by Uncle Phil, who the series has set up as his surrogate dad, Lou once again abandons his son, initially trying to sneak out without Will noticing. Smith feigns nonchalance initially, before switching seamlessly to fury and finally a plaintive, "How come you don't want me, man?" That draws a bear hug from Uncle Phil. On 8 Simple Rules, the show dealt with a very real tragedy, the death of lead John Ritter, by staging an hour-long farewell episode in which his television family react to his passing. Filmed a month after his fatal heart attack, the cast's emotions are as real as it gets. Before Brendan Fraser was the internet's favourite actor, he had a starring guest role in medical comedy Scrubs. Playing the brother-in-law of main character JD's surly mentor Dr. Cox, his character visits Sacred Heart Hospital having been in remission from leukemia for 2 years. The plot revolves around Cox blaming JD for screwing up and allowing an elderly patient to die, and Fraser's character Ben trying to talk sense into him. Cox worked on call for several days, refusing to trust JD after his mistake, and is even prepared to miss his son's birthday party until his brother-in-law convinces him otherwise. Finally, Ben tells him, "You have to forgive yourself." It's here the rug is pulled and the audience learns that it was Ben who died days previously, and the event in question is his funeral. JD overhearing his mentor talking to Fraser's character and asking, "Where do you think we are?" It's a theme the show would mine again with My Lunch, in which a mistake of Cox's own causes the death of 3 patients. It's not just live action either. Mention Do It For Her to a Simpsons fan, and they'll know exactly what you mean. Another Matt Groening project, Futurama, pulled a similar trick to Blackadder. The show centres on the life of Fry, a delivery boy who ends up in the year 3000. The episode Jurassic Bark sees him rediscover the fossilised remains of his dog Seymour, and resolve to clone him and even potentially restore his memory. Upon being told that the dog had lived to 15, dying a full 12 years after his master's disappearance, Fry decides against the plan, reasoning that Seymour would have moved on and found a new owner. A heartbreaking flashback shows the dog waiting, as instructed, outside the pizza shop for Fry to return. From Porridge to Phoenix Nights, Friends to How I Met Your Mother, countless shows have swapped the laughs for emotion and proved that the best comedy really is the kind that can make you cry. By Gabriel Mackay.
The Herald, Monday the 7th of November 2022. News. Whisky giant announces major peat restoration project in Ayrshire. This article is by Christy Dorsey. The company behind the Laphroaig and Bowmore whisky brands will today unveil a partnership to restore peatlands in Ayrshire as it works towards the conservation of the equivalent amount of peat used to make its single Islay malts. The partnership between Beam Suntory and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, RSPB, marks the second phase of the Peatland Water Sanctuary, PWS, initiative, a joint $4 million, £3.5 million conservation project launched in 2021. Beam Suntory will provide approximately $435,000, equivalent to £385,000 of funding, and restore and regenerate peatlands at the Aird's Moss Reserve in East Ayrshire. The work will take place over 4 years, covering approximately 160 hectares of land owned by RSPB Scotland. It follows on the first stage of the PWS initiative, which began with work to restore and conserve peatland near the Ardmore Distillery in Aberdeenshire in November 2021. Beam Suntory has committed to the restoration and conservation of 1,300 hectares of peatlands in Scotland by 2030, enough to produce the same amount of peat that it harvests every year in making its Scotch whiskies. Beyond that, there is a longer-term aim to restore sufficient peatlands by 2040, equal to twice the volume of peat that Beam Suntory harvests. We're now a year in since launching our PWS initiative, and it's rewarding to be using our accumulating knowledge and expertise to make a significant impact to Scotland's ecosystems, said Alistair Longwell, Head of Distillation and Environment at Beam Suntory. Working across the Aird's Moss Reserve in partnership with RSPB Scotland represents a great step forward in our goal to restore 1,300 hectares of peatland by 2030. This article is by Christy Dorsey.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 7th of November 2022. From the sports section, analysis. Celtic's last gasp Dundee United win showed the key reason why they will beat Rangers to the Scottish title. By Matthew Lindsay, Chief Football Writer. Celtic left it late to beat Dundee United in their cinched Premiership match at Parkhead yesterday. It took a last-minute Kyogo Furuhashi goal and an injury time Lille Abada strike to sew up the 3 points. But the 4-2 triumph still helped the Scottish champions to extend their lead over Rangers at the top of the table to 7 points. Their nearest challengers slumped to a 2-1 defeat to St Johnstone at McDermott Park yesterday. So can the Glasgow club be caught by their city rivals now? Is the title race over in November? And are their Tayside opponents fated to remain rooted to the bottom of the table and suffer another relegation? Here are 5 things we learned about the events in the East End of Glasgow. Strength and depth. Celtic manager Ange Postecoglou might not have European football to worry about anymore this season, but he still has a lot of league and cup fixtures to negotiate in the months ahead. He clearly has the strength and depth he needs to get through them and enjoy another successful campaign. He freshened up his starting lineup after the mentally and physically draining Champions League meeting with Real Madrid in Spain on Wednesday night, and made no fewer than 7 changes yesterday. Anthony Ralston, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Alexander Bernabei, Jota, David Turnbull, Sead Haksabanovic and Georgios Giakoumakis all came in, and Josip Juranovic, Karel Starfelt, Greg Taylor, Dyson Maeda, Aroy Mui, Furuhashi and Abada dropped out. The new-look side took care of business. Rangers manager Giovanni van Bronckhorst could only dream of having those kinds of options at his disposal. He is struggling to get 11 fit players on the park at the moment. The superior resources that Postecoglou possesses should ensure that Celtic retain their Scottish title come May. VAR too long. The penalty that referee David Dickinson awarded United in the first half, after ruling that Bernabei had handled the ball inside his own area, incensed the Celtic players, supporters and manager. But what really made Postecoglou's blood boil was the length of time it took the match official, who awarded the spot kick after watching a replay of the incident back on the pitchside monitor, and his VAR colleagues to arrive at the decision. He had a valid point. The system needs time to perfect here. It was always inevitable there would be teething problems when it was introduced. Still, there is a far too much standing around at the moment. It is killing the flow of matches as well as the atmosphere. The SFA must strive to speed things up going forward. Superb said. Haksabanovic has shown exactly why Postecoglou was so keen to bring him to Scotland back in August with his performances for Celtic in the last couple of months. The Swedish-born Montenegrin internationalist has played with great energy and no little invention, both out wide and in the playmaker role for the Scottish champions. But the 23-year-old did not netty going into the United game. He finally opened his account with a well-taken first-half double. He turned a Jota cross from a few yards out for the first, and pounced on a weak-headed clearance from Aziz Behic for the second. They promised to be the first of many. Having cost just £1.7 million, the skillful and powerful winger, who received a standing ovation when he was replaced by Abada in the second half, has proved to be another outstanding Postecoglou signing. Dozy defending. The slack play that resulted in Dylan Levitt netting an 87th minute equaliser for United was overshadowed by the late goals that Furuhashi and Abada scored. But Postecoglou must address the failings that led to the visitors drawing level. It had been coming. Greg Taylor headed a Glenn Middleton attempt off the line, and Ryan Edwards hit the post with a header. Celtic may not be so fortunate next time around. They need to learn to remain switched on for the full 90 minutes going forward. They will leak vital points and stumble in the title race if they fail to tighten up at the back. United upturn. Liam Fox's charges were devastated to go so close to getting a result at Parkhead and ending up with nothing to show for their efforts. But they can take heart from their all-round display. They defended well and created chances on the counter. If they perform as impressively going forward, they will move off the foot of the table. Their match against fellow strugglers Kilmarnock at Tannadice on Wednesday evening is of huge importance to them. They can go into it with confidence despite suffering yet another defeat. And that article was by Matthew Lindsay. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 7th of November 2022, from the sports section. Lawrence Shanklin nets late penalty winner as 10-man Hearts stun Motherwell. By Herald and Times Sport. Lawrence Shanklin scored an 89th minute penalty winner as 10-man Hearts beat Motherwell 3-2 in a Tynecastle thriller. Andy Halliday scored either side of half-time to make it 4 goals in 4 matches for the left-back, after Hearts teammate George Grant had been sent off in the 30th minute. Motherwell fought back after Lewis Moult came off the bench to hit his first goal since his return on loan on transfer deadline day, and Blair Spittle finished off an excellent move to level it in the 79th minute. But the visitors could not build on their equaliser, and Shanklin scored his 12th goal of the season after Sondre Solholm was penalised for handball. Both sides showed an attacking intent from the start, and Shanklin threatened 3 times in quick succession around the 12-minute mark. Liam Kelly stopped his attempted lob and saved a header either side of another header being blocked by Grant in the goalmouth. Motherwell lost Paul McGinn to injury, with Stephen O'Donnell a natural replacement. Hearts then attacked the right-back's area, and Robert Snodgrass set up Halliday, but Kelly pushed over the former Rangers player's strike. Motherwell had a decent chance after winning the ball high up the park, but Kevin Van Veen shot wide from 20 yards. O'Donnell's driven pass back put Kelly in trouble, but the goalkeeper saved well from Cammy Devlin, who sliced the rebound over. The chances kept coming. Motherwell defender Ricky Lemmy saw his header diverted just wide off Toby Sibbick, and Callum Slattery glanced a header wide from a brilliant delivery from Spittle. Referee Kevin Clancy was quick to show a red card to Grant after he caught Slattery in the follow-through following a lunging tackle. Craig Gordon was booked after running to the halfway line to remonstrate, but the decision stood after a relatively swift VAR check. Before the game could settle down, Hearts were ahead. Halliday had a header diverted wide from a Snodgrass corner before scoring from the next one, looping ahead over Matt Penny on the line in stoppage time. The home side were celebrating again about 70 seconds into the second half, when the former Rangers player ran onto Mackay's inside pass and swept a first-time shot inside the far post. Shanklin was not far away with an effort from the centre circle after Motherwell exposed themselves following a corner, and Van Veen had an ambitious strike of his own saved. Moult came on for Connor Shields in the 55th minute and netted 6 minutes later after being brought down by Gordon, having reached Penny's pass first. The goalkeeper was incredulous that a VAR check did not exonerate him, but he escaped a second yellow card. Moult was booked after pushing at Alex Cochrane in his attempt to speed up the restart. Gordon was soon beaten by a brilliant volley from Van Veen, but the Dutchman was flagged offside from a Sean Goss delivery. Hearts survived a VAR check for a handball appeal against Sibbick, but Motherwell pegged them back following a lengthy passing move which ended in Spittle sliding in to convert Stuart McKinstry's low cross. Hearts wanted the teams evened up when McKinstry filled Cochrane's second after being booked, but Clancy ignored the calls. The 10 men found extra reserves of energy following their midweek trip to Istanbul, and Solholm was penalised after Cochrane's cross hit his arm. Shanklin sent Kelly the wrong way from the spot, and Gordon made sure of the points with an acrobatic stop from a Goss volley. And that report was by the Herald and Times Sport. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 7th of November 2022, from the sports section, Formula 1. Thin-skinned Christian Horner's Sky boycott only hurts Red Bull, Susan Eaglestaff. People in the public eye getting irate at the press for saying something negative about them is nothing new. But last week, Christian Horner, the Red Bull Formula 1 boss, took being thin-skinned to new levels, boycotting Sky Sports because, basically, he didn't like what they said about his team. The comments on Sky were pretty mild. Reporter Ted Kravitz said Lewis Hamilton was robbed of the world title last year, a statement that understandably wasn't exactly welcomed by anyone at Red Bull, least of all champion Max Verstappen. But it's hardly controversial when all and sundry, including those at the sports governing body, the FIA, agreed the decision making on the final day of the last season had been far from flawless. But this raises a wider question about the sport media. Athletes and those connected with sport may not be in the same boat as the likes of politicians, who are duty bound to be scrutinised by the media, but, nevertheless, they're in a business that relies on media coverage to help promote their sport. F1 in particular would not be the multi-million-dollar business it is without the media. So to have no appreciation that journalists cannot merely be fans with laptops is showing a complete misunderstanding for the entire operation. Without criticism, sports coverage is worth noting. Those on the receiving end are entitled to be aggrieved by what they deem as negativity towards them, but to then try to censor what has been said is not only petty, but is to their own detriment. Sports coverage that only includes positive coverage is worthless. It is a tricky path that sports journalists are forced to tread. That Lance Armstrong got away with quite so much for quite so long is, at the admission of many of the journalists in the press pack at the time, due to their fear that if they wrote about suspicions of the American being a doper, they would be banned from his press conferences. And how can a cycling journalist do their job without access to the most high-profile cyclist of all time? Horner has now backtracked a little and said Red Bull's boycott of Sky Sports is indefinite rather than permanent. It is likely, then, that sooner rather than later, he will release his churlish, petty behaviour. Is doing far more damage to himself and his team than anyone else in the media. And another thing. A year ago last week, Peng Shuai disappeared from public view. The Chinese tennis player had made explosive allegations that she had been sexually assaulted by former China Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli, and she's barely been seen since. The allegations kick-started what has become one of the most turbulent years women's tennis has experienced. For 2 weeks after Peng's allegations, which were deleted from social media almost immediately after she posted them, she disappeared from public view, with no one able to contact her. She then showed up in a state media in an appearance that only serves to fuel more concern around her well-being. The response from women's tennis governing body, the WTA, was impressive. They suspended all business with China and withdrew all tournaments that were due to take place in that country. This move came at a significant financial cost to the sport. Since Peng's allegations a year ago, there has been little to reassure anyone that she is, in fact, safe and well. She has made several public appearances, but all have only served to exacerbate concerns that she is, at best, being pressured by Chinese authorities to deny her allegations and, at worst, being forcibly coerced into toeing the party line by saying the assault did not happen and she is fine. That the WTA took such a strong stance at the time was admirable, and even more so that they have stuck to their guns. The financial impact of withdrawing from China has been significant for a sport that had pinpointed the country as one of its primary targets for growing the game, but it must be applauded for putting the welfare of one of its players above financial gain. Not all sports would have made such a morally sound move. But the issue remains that, a year on, there is little reassurance of the welfare of Peng. She has not been seen since the Winter Olympics in February, and all that appearance did was reassure the wider world that she was alive. Nothing more. Where women's tennis goes now is unclear. The WTA chief, Steve Simon, says he has been assured she is safe and comfortable, but that surely means little if it's coming from a Chinese state source. As Billie Jean King Cup finals approach, they begin in Glasgow on Tuesday. Women's tennis is at a crossroads. Does it backtrack for the sake of financial gain? Or does it, as it has done for the past 12 months, remain resolute that doing the right thing is worth more than any amount of money? As it stands, it is taking the latter option, and, for that, women's tennis has shown itself to be the leader when it comes to putting athletes first. And that report was by Susan Eaglestaff. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 7th of November 2022, from the Voices section, Opinion. Is the UK living up to the climate pledges it made in Glasgow? Article by David Leask. All the best first footers come with a lump of coal. For his debut on Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, Miles Allen turned up with 2. The Oxford climate change professor had a story to tell about global heating, and he needed some props to do it. So he held up one chunk of the black stuff and said it represented 500 billion tonnes of fossil carbon. If you burn it and dump all the CO2 into the atmosphere, that represents 1 degree of warming, he said. When we first discovered we needed to reach net zero 15 years ago, we had just burned through the first 500 billion tonnes. It took 250 years. Then Professor Allen picked up his second lump of coal. 15 years later, and we are one third of the way through the next 500 billion tonnes, burning it as fast as ever, he added. And that one will take us to 2 degrees. That is a big deal, the scientist explained, because the world has decided that it needs to keep global heating to 1.5 degrees to avoid the worst of our predicted disasters. The expert was on the show because the latest round of climate talks, COP27, is kicking off in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el Sheikh. Much of the conversation will be around how the planet weans itself off carbon, how it switches to clean energy, and how the rich world helps the poor one to do so. But Professor Allen, not uncontroversially, thinks we'll have to find a way to reduce the harm from oil, gas and coal we burn now. So he backs carbon capture schemes which he claims are affordable. Still clutching his coal, he told Ms. Kuenssberg, "What I want politicians to acknowledge is that we have to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming before the world stops using fossil fuels." A well-prepared soundbite, but Kuenssberg wanted more. "Surely we have to kick our addiction to fossil fuels," she put to him. "It would be great if we could just say no," he answered, but fossil abstinence isn't working. Energy firms were fly-tipping, but this was a fixable problem. Earlier in the show, former Labour leader Ed Miliband, now Shadow Secretary for Climate Change, was keener on renewables. "It is now cheaper to save the planet than to destroy it," he pointed out with another well-worn but increasingly undeniable buzz phrase. Mr. Miliband reckoned his Tory opponents have lost a sense of urgency since they hosted the COP26 summit in Glasgow. "There is a vacuum of leadership," he said, though he made clear he had time for Alok Sharma, the Conservative MP who's the outgoing president of COP. The latest Prime Minister, at the time the Herald went to press this was a fella named Rishi Sunak, is headed to Egypt. He initially said he would give the event a pass. Mr. Sunak's talking head on the Sunday morning shows was Oliver Dowden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which, we were told, is a posh name for a government fixer. The poor guy had to explain why on earth his boss gave a cabinet job to Gavin Williamson, the apparently yobbish minister without portfolio, through a 4-letter text tiff when he did not get a seat at the Queen's funeral. Mr. Dowden also had to stumble through an explanation for why Mr. Sunak had changed his mind about going to Sharm. It is because the PA made good progress in the autumn statement last weekend, and now has the time. The government is strongly committed to climate action, he insisted. Over on BBC Scotland's Sunday show, Tessa Khan was not so sure. The Green activist and lawyer told host Martin Geisler that British ministers were failing to live up to pledges made in Glasgow a year ago. "What matters is what leaders do when they come home," she said. "The UK continues to disappoint." Nicola Sturgeon is also heading to Egypt, partly to push for aid to help poorer nations handle the unavoidable effects of climate change. But she did not escape criticism from Ms. Khan, especially over the SNP's need for North Sea hydrocarbons to bankroll the hypothetical independent state. Scotland, of course, will only be sovereign if its people vote for it, and that means a referendum. Sir Keir Starmer on the same programme was having none of that. Mr. Geisler asked the Labour leader if Scotland was a voluntary union. Yes, he replied, it was. But what is the democratic mechanism would be for testing this? Are Scots stuck in the union? Of course they're not stuck, he said, but this is about priorities. What is the priority at the moment? The priority at the moment is people paying their bills, is growing the economy. Mr. Geisler had no luck getting any kind of answer on how Labour would respect the priorities for the Scottish electorate if they do not happen to coincide with his own. He might as well have asked one of Professor Allen's lumps of coal. And that was an opinion piece by David Leask. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 7th of November 2022, from the Voices section. Westminster politics isn't broken, but Scottish politics is. An opinion piece by Kevin McKenna. In a properly functioning democracy, the SNP will be facing a significant level of jeopardy right now. Independence, the cause which drives them more than all others, has not even slightly progressed since the first referendum on independence more than 8 years ago. Nor, by any reasonable analysis, can the party claim, after 15 years of virtually unopposed government, that they have improved the educational and health outcomes of Scotland's most marginalised communities. The fate of independence rests upon the judgment of a handful of men and women who are the British establishment made flesh. Beyond that, as we've seen in recent weeks, the SNP itself doesn't seem to have nailed down a firm position on our independent Scotland's future currency, and how that chimes with its desire to join the EU. "We don't need to adopt the euro," says one senior personnel. "Oh yes you will," say assorted EU apparatchiks. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," say the rank and file. "Let's just get independence done," they say with the same implacable glibness of Boris Johnson saying let's get Brexit done. Beyond this, There has been a pledge to make the next Westminster election, which must be held no later than January 2025, a de facto independence referendum. Or is that the next Holyrood election in 2026? No one is quite sure. Nor is anyone sure about how robust that result would be in the face of international or legal scrutiny. Thus far, 3 white papers have been produced detailing how an independent Scotland would work. The latest of these, on the economy, drew a withering response last month from the Yes Movement's foremost campaigning group, the Commonweal, who dismissed it as the latest dismal paper in a series of dismal papers. Its director, the respected analyst Robin McAlpine, tore it to shreds. This is one of his milder observations. Since it seems very unlikely that the UK will tell commercial banks they can reduce the deposits they must keep with the Bank of England, Scotland's entire monetary well-being is almost completely dependent on a significant surcharge on commercial banks operating in Scotland. Let's see how that goes down. Even when Nicola Sturgeon seems to have been backed into an irrecoverable position, such as when she was forced to answer for Scotland's ferries crisis last week, there was always a way out of it. No one in what passes for the opposition at Holyrood seems capable of causing her lasting damage. Similarly, when having to answer for Scotland's appalling drug death crisis, nor has the First Minister endured much scrutiny over the clandestine ditching of her oft-repeated pledge to reduce the educational attainment gap. There is a well-worn word and, so far, robust formula here that's become a pattern whenever anything emerges which should cause other political leaders sleepless nights. Pledges are made, political commentators wail and gnash their teeth, myriad agencies in receipt of vast quantums of government funding set targets for apologies are made. Within a few weeks the caravan has moved on and a few more special advisors are hired, a sector which has experienced remarkable growth in recent years, to ensure positive messages land next time around. Support for independence flutters around the 48% to 52% mark and, as a Herald survey revealed last week, a clear majority of voters seem to trust the SNP to govern better than the Scottish Tories or Scottish Labour. Laughably, several SNP figures and their acolytes point to England and claim that the Westminster political system is broken because we've had 4 Tory Prime Ministers in as many years. You might also argue, though, that this is evidence of a healthy degree of accountability and dissent in the UK's government party. Barely 2 years out, the result of the next general election remains in the balance, although you'd probably still back Labour to win it. Contrast this with Scottish politics. There is virtually no dissent within the SNP that threatens Nicola Sturgeon's position, although her clumsy and arrogant handling of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill might yet pose a challenge. The next Holyrood election is virtually certain to return another SNP government and probably the one after that. The chief executive officer of the party she leads is also her husband, who forms an extra barrier of protection from any organised resistance within the SNP. If this absurd arrangement was permitted to proceed within the UK government, we'd be citing it as further evidence that Westminster politics is broken. As one former Scottish Conservative politician pointed out to me last week, Nicola Sturgeon is the only leader of a Western democracy who is entirely in charge of her own destiny. This man also stated that, as a parent, his expectations of the Scottish Government amounted to ensuring that Scotland was a good place in which his children could grow up and make a rewarding future for themselves. He further suggested that if he were to see any evidence of the SNP delivering this, he might even be tempted to vote yes in a future referendum, but there has been none. The only political party at Holyrood capable of breaking this 15-year political drift is Scottish Labour. Yet, while they stubbornly refuse to even entertain the notion of a second independence referendum, they will always be in the margins of Scottish politics. After a decade and a half looking for a purpose, this party is now reduced to hoping it will secure a handful more Scottish seats in the bounce that might accompany a Keir Starmer triumph in the next Westminster election. Westminster politics isn't broken and, while this debilitating impasse in Scotland remains, you can't say the same about Holyrood politics. The arid and parched nature of Scottish politics over such a long period begins to erode the framework of our civic institutions and stakeholder organisations. This encompasses the third sector, all of our quangos, and any other organisation that relies on the Scottish Government for public funding. When all power is collected in one ruling couple, surrounded by a hand-picked coterie of acolytes and with no discernible opposition for the foreseeable future, you simply fall in line and adopt every ukase and every person will win without process or hesitation if you know what's good for you. Organisations delivering art and culture, education, health, policing, housing and employability must adopt the path of least resistance if they want to remain in favour or secure patronage. It's how medieval courts worked. Only a second referendum can break this sense of stagnation, and any outcome would be better than this. And that was a comment piece by Kevin McKenna.
Herald Scotland recorded on Monday, 7th of November 2022. Arts and Entertainments. As the Herald launches a joke book, we look at the dark, dark roots of Scottish comedy by Brian Beacom, Senior Features Writer. Scotland, and in particular the west of Scotland, delivers great comedy with the speed and regularity of an Amazon driver and a promise. But why? How about endemic poverty, cultural and economic deprivation, and sectarian bigotry? Could it be helped by the fact that so many young lives in the west of Scotland would have made a perfect subject matter for an Oscar Mazzaroli photograph? And think of how our 50s town planners promised so much and delivered so little. Hasn't the absurdity that was the inner city defenestration policy also helped form and inform our comedians? Not convinced yet? Well, I glide over the comedy content of some of our funniest people can offer more than a clue that being downtrodden has indeed fostered heaps of defiant joy. The social and economic darkness has prompted us to become delightfully cynical and circumspect, and the legacy of our no-means city aggression has fostered the instinct to be funny and hit out. Let's take some comedy themes and consider the evidence, such as aggression. Doesn't Frankie Boyle's line, "Our greatest fear is to die alone," which is why I intend to take quite a few people with me, convey a beautiful hostility? Yes, we love to be angry, thanks to a cold countenance since our times began, most likely thanks to the weather, varying levels of starvation and exploitation. Think grumpy Victor Meldrew or Janie Godley's delicious hot soup story, where she talks of scalding her child. And what of Fern Brady's line, "A little girl just blew a raspberry at me for checking out her fit dad, and honestly, it's the most offended I've been in years." Gonna SH star G, your da, you wee cow. Brutal. Or Jerry Sadowitz, "I only hate two things, living things and objects." And who in the UK can top the comic menace of chewing the fat's big man's brackets gangster close brackets maw when addressing a Christmas shopping rival? "You agitating, my boy? I'll stick this Barbie that far up your A star 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 that Ken will need to dangle for your tonsils just to get a good night winch." Our comedians have also fed on the Scottish survivalist trait, which is sarcasm. Consider Armando Iannucci's in the thick of it political Malcolm Tucker when greeting a pair of rival advisors, Laurel and F star 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 G Hardy. "Glad you could join us. Did you manage to get that piano up the stairs okay?" Tucker also produced the wonderful line, "I'd love to stop and chat to you, but I'd rather have type 2 diabetes." Most of our comedy stars have reached into the well of history and personal experience for comedic value. From our music hall and variety stars such as Jack Anthony, Lex McLean, Ricky Fulton and Stanley Baxter, Dorothy Paul and Elaine C. Smith. Thankfully, that well has been as burnt as a black witch's heart at 3 in the morning in winter. But turn this darkness into jokes and funny stories and you have comedy dopamine. Give these stories a twist, turn them over a few times and they emerge as absurdist. Billy Connolly once declared, "Never trust a man when left alone with a tea cosy, doesn't try it on." Wonderful. And how about Chick Murray's ridiculous, "I rang the bell of this small bed and breakfast place, whereupon a lady appeared at an outside window. 'What do you want?' she asked. 'I want to stay here,' I replied. 'Well, stay there then,' she said and closed the window." There's also no doubt that the likes of Connolly have filled their comedy boots with poverty. My parents used to take me to the pet department and tell me it was a zoo, and we offer a nice line in self-deprecation, evidenced by Arnold Brown's clever, "I enjoy using the comedic technique of self-deprecation, but I'm not very good at it." Indeed, putting yourselves down via our incomprehensible speech was also exemplified brilliantly by a Stanley Baxter's Parley Amo. "Is that a Mara on your barra, Clara?" Parley Amo, and later with Chewing the Fat's Rab McGlinchey, who interprets court conversations for the Neds. We're also fortunate in Scotland also to have such tragic weather. As Rab C. Nesbitt once reflected, "You can tell when it's summer in Scotland. The rain's warm." Connolly also worked the weather vane with, "There are two seasons in Scotland, June and winter." But let's not forget our talent for turning the country's embracing of darkness into comedy. Frankie Boyle, for example, often proves to be darker than the inside of Ozzy Osbourne's Under the Stairs cupboard. And welcome, he once said to a television audience, a woman who's brainier than Kurt Cobain's garage wall. It's Carol Vorderman. Kevin Bridges also likes to switch off the lights every now and again. I love the Americans who visit Edinburgh. They're enthusiastic, he says. When they're up at Edinburgh Castle, they think it's a high school because they hear gunshots every lunchtime. Yet, let's not forget the talent for the surreal with Chick Murray, the master. My father was a simple man. My mother was a simple woman. You see the result standing in front of you, a simpleton. Now, to destroy the argument that Scots comics are blessed to have been born into a backdrop of unremitting wretchedness, Billy Connolly once maintained there is no such thing as a Scottish comedy. But can you imagine his bum and bike gag emerging from any other back green in the world, or the crucifixion played out anywhere else but a Gallagate bar? So who can truly deny that regular infusions of sadness, sarcasm, and distress have seeped into our souls to the point it's part of our DNA and passed down to our children? How else can you explain the thinking of one 9-year-old schoolboy when asked to pick a character from Macbeth and sum them up? He chose the king and wrote this mini script. Day 1, going to see my wee friend Macbeth and hoping he doesn't kill me in my sleep. Day 2, Ghost King. I can't believe he killed me. Does this not indeed confirm our wonderfully troubled past? Our sense of marginalisation and being damned to woe and misery has contributed to our wonderfully disturbed sense of humour? By Brian Beacom. Herald Scotland, recorded on Wednesday, 9th of November 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Books. New release. Sadie, Call the Police, by Kirkland Ciccone. By Alistair Mavitt. Sadie, Call the Police, Kirkland Ciccone, fledgling press, £10.99. Even in the unglamorous surroundings of 1970s Falkirk, the young Sadie Relish can find magic anywhere. Moving into a damp, mouldy flat in Little Denny Road with her mother and sister Lily in the roasting summer of 1976, Sadie hasn't much to look forward to but bullying at home, unpopularity at school, and noisy feuds with the neighbours. Any book in which a little girl stands up and announces to her class, "When I grow up, I want to be a prostitute just like my mother," isn't going to be entirely devoid of joy and laughter. Created by the Lanarkshire-based author of 5 previous novels, including the acclaimed Happiness is Wasted on Me, Sadie is a misfit who likes to spend her time at the library and believes that everyday life is underpinned by magic. She and her friend Gregor hang offerings in the branches of a tall tree the locals call Old Sybil, in the belief that it grants wishes, and when she learns of a local pond that is an unfeasibly bright blue, she concludes that its hue must be of mystical origin. That conceit gets harder to cling to as she reaches adolescence and faces the challenges of being a typical provincial teenager, with the additional embarrassment of a mother who, everybody around her knows, provides for her kids by going out in the night shift. Her mum, Mither, is an indomitable figure, a tough woman wreathed in cigarette smoke who's adept at getting rid of people she doesn't like, whether they're annoying neighbours or deadbeat boyfriends. From a distance, according to Sadie, Mither came across like an amalgam of a mob enforcer and Dolly Parton. She's never better than when she attempts to get troublesome neighbours evicted by posting a petition in the Stair, claiming that they're drug dealers whose kids are forced to shite outside because their own toilets are blocked with drugs, and fakes the first few signatures herself. Self-conscious, insecure, uncertain of the future and what she wants out of life, the teenage Sadie struggles to prevent her spirit being crushed, making plans that she hopes won't end up collapsing and depositing her, yet again, back in her childhood bedroom. She discovers at an early age that alcohol can help numb the pain of her existence, and by the time she loses her virginity drunk at a party, with no memory of what happened, she doesn't believe in spells anymore. What she does retain is a belief in love, but that too will take a battering as the years go by. The second half of the book is more subdued, as Sadie wrestles with the pressures of marriage and motherhood. The Rangers-obsessed father-in-law, whose aversion to anything green extends to milk bottle tops, is, however, a comic highlight, along with her thirst for retribution after a life-changing revelation. A story of mothers, daughters, sisters, abusive fathers, and friendships. It takes us to some dark places, but Sadie's first-person narration sparkles with wry humour even at her lowest points. Her own occasional transgressions are easy to forgive, given how hard it's been for her to come to terms with herself while not knowing who her father is, and then discovering that finding out who her father is actually worse than not knowing. By the time it's occurred to us that Sadie, called the police, might actually be a meditation on revenge, we've been through so much with her that it's a wrench to realise that this deeply affecting novel will soon be over. By Alistair Mabbott. Herald Scotland recorded on Monday 7th of November 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Eurythmics inducted into Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by Emma Sabeljack, digital reporter. The Eurythmics were among the latest group of music legends to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Scottish singer-songwriter Annie Lennox joined Dave Stewart on the stage at the Microsoft Theatre in Los Angeles on Saturday night. Lennox was tearful as she labelled their musical success a great adventure after Stewart called her one of the greatest performers, singers and songwriters of all time. "Thank you, Dave, for this great adventure," she said. Duran Duran was the first act to be inducted, followed by Lionel Richie, who opened with his hit ballad Hello. His songs are the soundtrack of my life, your life, everyone's life, Lenny Kravitz said in inducting Richie. To name all of his brilliant songs would take, well, all night long, he added, invoking the name of the hit Richie would light up the room with a few minutes later, in a sing-along set that brought the night's most enthusiastic reaction. After performing Hello, Richie breezed into his 1977 hit with the Commodores, Easy. In his acceptance speech, Richie lashed out at those during his career who accused him of straying too far from his black roots. "Rock and roll is not a colour," he said. "It's a feeling, it is a vibe. And if we let that vibe come through, this room will grow and grow and grow." Eurythmics took the stage next with a soulful, danceable rendition of 1986's Missionary Man. "Well, I was born an original sinner, I was born from original sin," singer Annie Lennox belted out, bringing the audience clapping into its feet 4 hours into the show. It was followed by a rousing rendition of their best-known hit, Sweet Dreams. Eminem also received the honour and was the only hip-hop artist among the inductees, the only one whose heyday came after the 1980s, and he brought an edge to the evening that was otherwise missing outside of the heavy metal stylings of Judas Priest. After opening briefly with 1999's My Name Is, he brought on Aerosmith's Steven Tyler to sing the chorus of Dream On for 2003's Sing for the Moment, which samples the Aerosmith classic. Then he brought on Ed Sheeran to sing his part in the 2017 Eminem jam River as rain fell on the stage. "I'm probably not supposed to actually be here tonight for a couple of reasons," Eminem, wearing a black hoodie, said as he accepted the honour. "One I know is that I'm a rapper and this is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame." He is only the 10th hip-hop artist among well over 300 members of the Hall of Fame. The inductees were joined by Carly Simon, Harry Belafonte, Judas Priest and Dolly Parton, who gave the honour an enthusiastic embrace after temporarily turning it down. By Emma Sabeljack. Herald Scotland recorded on Friday 4th of November 2022. Arts and Entertainments. Opera Review. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, Marilyn Forever. Royal Conservatoire, Scotland, 4 stars, by Keith Bruce. Opera lovers in Glasgow have had a rare opportunity this week to catch productions of works by living composers, with Osvaldo Golijov's I Nadabar having one further outing on Saturday before Scottish Opera takes it to Edinburgh's Festival Theatre, across the road from the Theatre Royal. At the Alexander Gibson Opera School studio, master students at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland are performing chamber works by Michael Nyman and Gavin Bryars. Both Nyman's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for Her Hat from 1986 and Bryars' Marilyn Forever from 2013 are essentially short stories given musical form. But while the former still has the ability to surprise, the life and last days of Hollywood's doomed blonde Norma Jean is a tale everyone knows. That's part of the reason why the first part of this double bill is the more satisfying, although another may be traced in the way the writings of neurologist Oliver Sacks have made the transition to stage and screen, and in his own deep knowledge and fascination with music. Tenor William Serrell is Dr. S, the stage version of the therapist, and baritone Ross Cummings is musician-patient Dr. P, with French soprano Marie Caillou as devoted wife. Although many would now recognise Dr. P's ailment as dementia, both Serrell and Caillou preserve the exploratory nature of Christopher Lawrence's text, and performances that make big demands on their vocal skills as well. Cummings has the bigger night though, with a very affecting characterisation of Dr. P
and then multiple roles as the men in the life of Monroe, including Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller. Director Caroline Clegg links the two pieces in her staging with projections in the Nyman, using an earlier cinema star, Betty Davis, as part of Dr. S's examination, while Marilyn Forever relies on movie musical props like bowlers and brollies. Mezzo Megan Maker makes the most of her starring role in a sensational blonde wig with knowing physicality, but never overplays the stereotype. Tenor James McIntyre and bass baritone Ryan Garnham are the Tritones chorus first introduced to us as the parasitic reporter and photographer at her deathbed. The 11-piece on-stage band are superb in the Briars, but the music is more interestingly scored than it is written, and cannot have been easy for the vocal quartet to learn. Baker audibly has a superb range, and while Cumming is highly versatile and a fine actor, there was less for him to show off his voice in either work. Nyman's deft overlapping lines for his cast surely have their own challenges, but the trio made light work of them. The strings, piano and harp band for The Man Who were just as assured under conductor William Cole's firm guidance, and the Conservatoire has to be praised for tackling such repertoire. The future of opera needs its emerging voices to be as familiar with contemporary repertoire as they are with the more familiar classics, and Nyman and Briars join a growing list of living composers that had works performed recently at the RCS. Final performance in the double bill on Friday at 7:15 p.m. by Keith Bruce.
The Herald, the 8th of November, in the Arts and Events section. Biffy Clyro's returned to Glasgow after stopping a gig to get support for fan feared seriously hurt by Martin Williams. Biffy Clyro Ovo Hyro. One of Scotland's biggest modern rock exports, Biffy Clyro arrived in Glasgow on Sunday night after being praised for stopping a gig after a fan was feared seriously injured in the crowd. The Simon Neil-fronted Kilmarnock-formed Rockers immediately stopped playing after a fan had to be taken to hospital after a collapse in the mosh pit at their Bonfire Night gig at the First Direct Arena in Leeds. Some fans have been trying to get the gig stopped after the fan fell to the ground. Eventually the fan was wheeled out of the arena after dislocating his knee. And a friend has paid tribute to the Scots, saying he wanted to give a shout out to Biffy Clyro. He said, "It's not how we wanted to end our gig, but as he was being wheeled out, he still said, 'Mon the Biff.'" One of the fans at the gig said Biffy Clyro stopping was utter class. Another fan, Colleen Gates, said, "So glad he's okay. We were really worried, as it took ages to get him out. Sucks that you missed the show, but hope he's on the mend soon." The band, whose core are a trio, have come a long way since their first incarnation of what would eventually become Biffy Clyro was formed in 1995, when 15-year-old air-bass guitarist and Simon Neil started playing his songs with friend Kilmarnock-born Ben Johnston. Ben's twin brother, James Johnson, was soon brought in, and the three have now notched up 9 studio albums, 6 of which, Puzzle, Only Revolutions, Opposites, Ellipsis, A Celebration of Endings, and The Myth of the Happily Ever After, reached the top 5 in the UK album chart, with their 6th studio album, Opposites, claiming their first UK #1 album. It is curious to realise that of 2021, in total, the band spent 165 weeks in the top 75 of the UK album charts, with 3 of those being in the top position at #1 and 76 weeks within the main top 40 of the album's charts. The band's singles spent a total of 79 weeks in the UK singles charts, with 6 weeks in the top 10 and 42 in the top 40. Their biggest UK hits have been Mountains in 2008 and Many of Horror, which reached #8 in 2010. Both would have pride of place as returned home to home ground at the OVO Hydro. It comes at a time when the whole idea of a future for guitar-led rock has perhaps become questionable, with the hit radio stations seemingly looking elsewhere. Biffy and Glasgow showed just how difficult it is to pin down what their thing actually is, as it moulds together everything from pop rock, soft metal, grunge, post-hardcore and even hoary old progressive rock. And sometimes a combination of some or all of those. What they don't tend to do is become too extreme, and consequently, if Glasgow is anything to go by, have a wide appeal right across the age ranges, with teenagers, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, 40-somethings, and older all present here. This is not to say that Neil and co cannot wail with the best of them. It helps too that Neil is, shall we say, presentable, or as the guy behind me screamed, Simon is sexy, in an almost mock Glaswegian voice reminiscent of Mike Myers' fat bastard character from the Austin Powers series. With only his mosaic patterned red and white shorts for clothing halfway through, and with dark long curly locks and a messianic beard, he comes across as a cross between AC/DC's Angus Young and Jesus Christ. It starts with a bang, and the anthemic ultimate pomp rocker with its "This is how we effed it from the start" chant, along that is underpinned by a film kaleidoscope of angular shapes and lights from what is to become a breathtaking live screen accompaniment that takes the visual experience of arena shows to a new level. At times, it is like you have been placed in a CT scanner, along with 14,000 other fans, with white lights making your senses spin. No serious illnesses will, of course, be detected. Before a rocker's fourth song, Who's Got to Match, Neil swings a lantern, and in his first words the crowd says, "We are Biffy effing Clyro. Can I hear you?" Black Chandelier comes next, and its breast-beating chorus and animated theatrics really ignite this crowd, and Neil announces, "Glasgow, it's good to be back." Instant history sounds quite epic. Mountains get a spin, and Neil remarks, it's special to be here this evening with you, so thank you very much. So thank you for coming. We have missed you so very, 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 very much. Where it sags is in the middle, where some of Biffy's more insipid, less killer tracks are spun until the pop rocker Biblical gets the crowd going with mass oas. Cop Syrup, the final song in a celebration of endings from 2020, is an ear-opener with its crashing guitars, which shows that Biffy are more than capable of the delightfully crazed with Neil letting rip, barking like possessed by a dead punk madman before it segues into a spacey prog rock. It is delightfully atypical and unconventional, and even metalheads may approve. The predictable encore starts quietly and acoustically, but it is the final song that brings the house down. Before that, Neil proclaims, "We are so proud to be from the west of Scotland. Thanks for making us proud." And the anthemic Many of Horror is the arms aloft showstopper of the night, and a genuine shivers down the spine moment as the thousands collectively sing, "When we collide, we come together. If we don't, we'll always be apart." As Neil exits, he yells, "We are Biffy effing Clyro," and the near 2-hour power rock, light and film show spectacle is over, this time without major incidents. That was by Martin Williams.
And that was this week's The Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.